Hey teacher friends, my name's Kelly Daly and I love to help teachers create expert learners in their classroom. And one of the ways I love to do this is by using a standards-based grading system. So if you're wondering how does a standards-based grading system work, then today's video is just for you. So stay tuned for me to show you what you could be doing that would work in your classroom if you were to switch to a standards-based grading system today. So before we jump into how a standards-based grading system works, I just want to give a little bit of background about what standards-based grading is to kind of set the framework for why I would suggest that you switch to this type of grading system. So standards-based grading is a system of grading where we focus as teachers on student learning. We're focused on students mastering content. With standards-based grading, content for our course is divided up into these major standards, major chunks of information, which you're probably already familiar with anyway. And the goal here is that students are expected to master these particular standards by the end of a course. And so as the teacher, you're not only teaching your lessons, but you are providing feedback to students about how well they have mastered these concepts. And you're tracking this data and you're reporting back to students and parents how they are reaching mastery, do they need to improve, what can be done to reach that mastery level. Overall, the goal is to help improve student learning. So you might be wondering, standards-based grading versus traditional grading system, what's the difference? And so the biggest difference between these two grading systems is how you actually grade work. So in a traditional grading system, students are given a grade on classwork, homework, quizzes, tests, projects. Everything gets a grade. And by the end of the course, or maybe even at the end of a term or a semester, all those grades get averaged into one single number to represent the grade for the course. Grading on a 100-point scale creates drastic room for error because how do we really understand the difference between an 85 and an 87 in terms of achievement? Like, what's the true difference there? Or is there even a difference? So with having this large grading scale, there's more room for error in actually giving a grade based on achievement. Because additionally, there could be zeros in that student's grade that could really drag down an average. Or some students might be doing extra credit to get as many points as possible to improve their grade. And sometimes that extra credit could be as simple as drawing a picture at the end of a quiz, which I've seen teachers do, or bringing in a box of tissues for a class, or winning a game. They get extra points. So do these grades actually represent how well a student has mastered standards for that particular course? Probably not. So with standards-based grading, the grading system is really meant to reflect student achievement. So with a standards-based grading system, the goal here is to make a smaller grading scale that is more accurate. The smaller the grading scale, there's less room for error. So with standards-based grading, you're usually using a 4, maybe 5-point grading scale where the different ranges in that scale represent a student's mastery of a standard. So instead of grading things per assignment, you grade per standard. So if you create a test that covers 2 or 3 standards, each standard will have its own grade. If there's a project with 2 standards on it, each standard would have its own grade. So one single assignment could have more than one grade associated with it. And that's because the grade is to reflect the student's mastery of a standard, not an assignment. With standards-based grading, we're also trying to remove behavior from grades. So if a student needs extra time to complete an assignment, they get it. There's no deduction of late points because the goal is the student will master content. So if we don't give them that opportunity, or we penalize them because they are taking longer than their peers, that doesn't really reflect what a student knows. because maybe they can do well, they could master that standard, but they just need that extra time. But if we penalize them, they'll just say, forget it. I don't even want to do the assignment now. It's already late. So those deadlines that we assign as teachers, they make students conform to our timeline that we expect them to meet, but all of our students are different. Some students could probably complete an assignment really quickly, and others might need longer. And so with standards-based grading, there is no deduction of late points. We want them to reach that mastery. And yeah, it might take kids longer, and that's okay, because that is learning. No one learns at the same pace. Just like walking. We were all babies once, and we all started walking at some point, but some of us, could walk pretty early on, and some of us, it took longer before we could walk on our own. Just like learning. And I know this concept of late work can be a real struggle with teachers, because as teachers, we want to instill some important life skills in our students, such as being able to meet a deadline, because that's really important outside of high school as students move into a career. I get that. It doesn't mean I don't account for it whatsoever in my classroom. With standards-based grading, the grade a student gets is based on mastery. But that doesn't mean I can't comment on the fact that this student, was way past a deadline and that they did take longer. So I use report card comments. I use lots of other ways to communicate that information other than just deducting their grade. Because the grade, in my opinion, should reflect what a student knows, not how fast a student can do it. So I still am reporting on it and keeping track of that. And so I can say to parents, I'm not sure if they just need extra time to complete assignments or they're just being lazy. So I can say, look at all these assignments. These are all the ones they did late. And so I can still have those conversations and keep students somewhat accountable for completing work on time. Additionally, the biggest difference between a standards-based grading system and a traditional grading system is that in traditional grading systems, all those different grades on assignments get averaged together. So a student could have really struggled early on in the course and did really poorly, but by the end of the course, they could have really pulled it together and really started to understand things. But when we average those grades together, they would turn out with just maybe like a C. But does that reflect their improvement? No, it takes all that improvement away from them. So in a standards-based grading system, we move away from the average because the average doesn't paint the whole picture. When you average things together, it can take away the fact that a student has improved, which is what we want as teachers. We want our students to improve. So in a standards-based grading system, the grade they get reflects the most recent evidence of mastery. So if a student struggles, but then by the end of the course, they've mastered a standard, the grade they get is the mastery grade. Whereas sometimes it could be the reverse. A student did really well once they were taught it right at the beginning, but then as they came back to this particular standard throughout the course, they completely bombed it. And now they're approaching it, but not quite there. That's the grade they will get. So it forces students to be constantly improving on themselves. It's not like I can do well once and then never go back to it ever again. They have to keep up with the material because we want them to learn. So that's a major, major difference between the two grading systems. All right, so if you're now thinking why should I bother switching? This seems like a lot of work because these two grading systems are really, really different. I get it. But here's the reason why. The problem with the traditional grading system is that it encourages students to earn points for their grade. I like to call it grade grubbing. I know when I was a student, I was a grade grubber. I wanted all A's. And if I felt like I was teetering on a B to an A, I would do whatever I needed to get those points to get an A. Didn't mean I was learning. It just meant I was earning points. And students know this. They know how to play the game of school to get points to get an A. And the thing that really struck me when thinking about this is, students will cram study before a test so they do really well. And then as soon as that test is over, it's like poof, everything that they just studied is gone from their brain. And I read this quote, which I would like to read to you, from this guy, Henry Roediger. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right. And it really stuck with me because this is what he said. He said, cramming may lead to a better grade on a given exam. But with many students, it's not like they can't remember the material when they move on to a more advanced course. It's like they've never seen it before. Wow, that's so powerful because it's so true. These students are so focused on getting a good grade, they will just cram all that information in their head the night before, and then the next day it's gone. They haven't actually learned. And I know myself, I did this as a student, and it's embarrassing to think about the cram studying mentality. But it's true, and students know this, and this is what they do, and they don't learn. And this is where, as a teacher, I struggled because I want my students to learn. I don't want them just to get an A and not have learned anything. That's not how it should work. So this is what prompted me to want to switch to a standards-based grading system. I no longer wanted kids just playing that game of school to get the points they needed to get an A. I wanted them to learn. So this is why standards-based grading can help students actually learn, is because you're taking away the point system from them. They actually need to learn in order to get that good grade. And I was really finding this in my AP classes because the students, they wanted that A so badly, but when it came time to taking practice tests and whatnot, they were doing really badly. How can you have an A and do really poorly on the AP exam? It just doesn't make sense to me. You haven't clearly learned, because if you've learned the material, you should do well. So I switched to the standards-based grading system to really help my students on their learning in my classes. All right, so if you're wondering how this all works in a classroom, here's what you would need to do. First thing to make a standards-based grading system work is you need to develop a grading scale that works for you. So like I said, there are some 4-point scales, 5-point scales, even 6-point scales. But as you start to increase the size of your grading scale, this is where there's more room for error. So I highly recommend a 4-point grading scale. So I like to think of it as a level 4 score. The highest score you can get is you've mastered the content. You have shown me you are an expert on this standard. You can apply that standard in complex and new ways. A level 3 on my grading scale is you are meeting the standard, meaning you can do what the standard says. You're not showing it in complex ways. It's more like you can recall it. You know the information, you know how to use the skill associated with that standard. A level 2 is you're approaching the standard. So the student is kind of getting there, but there's still some pieces that they're missing or skills that they're not quite, doing properly yet. And again, the idea here is yet. So we're using a growth mindset with this grading system. And then a level 1 is, not meeting that standard. So either you've shown me no evidence, meaning you haven't turned anything in, or what you've turned in has just been so completely wrong or completely off the mark. So those are my 4 levels of my grading scale. Again, 5-point you could do. I've seen it where 5 is mastery, 1 is like they've tried but they're not getting it really at all, and then the 0 would be that the student just completely hasn't turned anything in. So that is an option as well. All right, the next big thing about making a standards-based grading system work is using rubrics. A major piece of this is providing students with mastery-oriented feedback, which means you are telling them why they have not achieved mastery, or if they did, why did they achieve it? And the way you do this is using rubrics. And rubrics that I had seen growing up, and even starting out as a teacher, was like having all these columns and rows and lots of text smushed into these little tiny boxes. And those were just so overwhelming. So I've moved to a nice, really simple rubric whenever I'm grading a quiz, grading a project. And yes, I use rubrics for quizzes and tests. Which I can explain more in detail later. But my rubric is super simple. The first column is the standard that is being assessed, and there might be more than one. The next column is the number level I'm giving them, the 4, 3, 2, or 1. And then the last column is the comments, why they are there. And this is the most important part. If we want our students to learn and improve their work, we got to tell them why. Often with the traditional grading system, student gets a 75, they see the questions they got wrong, they crumple it up, throw it away. They're not actually thinking about how to improve. And so giving this mastery-oriented feedback, you're really telling the kid, the student, this is what you need to do if you're looking to get a higher score. And students really take that feedback to heart. They see how much you're invested in them with these rubrics. And I know what you might be thinking. That sounds like a lot of extra work. Yes and no. Yes, it is to grade and give all that feedback, but the actual assigning levels, super easy. You can tell a 4 from a 3, from a 2, from a 1 very easily as a teacher. Like, you just see it, you know. Coming up with reasons why can be the little bit more difficult piece or more work piece. But what I've started to do is come up with my own comment bank. So a level 4, I have a general comment I use. Level 3, I have a general comment. And then I fine tune things for specific students. And then oftentimes I can then copy those ones that are fine tuned to specific things in an assignment and copy it between other students that have the same issues. So once you get a couple comments going, it becomes a lot easier because I can just copy and paste comments over and over again. The last and most important thing that makes a standards-based grading system work is having a standards-based reporting system or a report card, or even like a data tracking sheet. And so what the problem can be in your classroom that you might face, which is what I face with this whole standards-based grading system, is that my grade book, my online learning management system, does not support standards-based grading. It is definitely a traditional grading system where you get one assignment, one grade. And so to kind of circumvent that, I had to create my own report card system. So I use Google Sheets or Excel, depending on what you have. And so for every student, they get one of these sheets, which they are more than welcome to fill out on their own and keep their own records. I have it in print, I have it digitally, where they get all the standards for the course, usually like 12 to 15. Every time they're assessed on it, there's a column for their evidence that they can fill in what level they got, a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. And so standard number 1, first time they got a 4, the next time they got a 2, the next time they got a 3, they would fill that in across for that standard. At the very end of the tracking sheet, there's a column for current mastery. And so at the end of a term, at the end of a semester, or at the end of the whole course, this is where a student will look at their evidence across each standard and say, where am I at? Have I actually mastered it by the end of the course, or have I not? So they look at those levels and they say, based on the data, this is where I'm at in terms of my mastery. And so by having that tracking system, students can see I started really strong on this standard, but I've really started to fall off the bandwagon here. I need to go back and really look at this standard again. And that tracking sheet can be very helpful for students to keep track of their mastery on all of these different standards. So if your learning management system like mine doesn't support standards-based grading, then you have to kind of come up with something on your own for it. All right, I hope I helped you get a better sense today about how does a standards-based grading system work. So if you are ready to jump in and start in implementing your own standards-based grading system in your classroom, I do have a free guidebook for you that will walk you through step-by-step in more detail than I did with you today about how you can get this started in your classroom. So if you are ready to switch to standards-based grading today, get that free guidebook by clicking the link below in the description, and you can get started on your standards-based grading journey today.